What's up, nerds? I've got Josh Weil with me. He is running for US Senate against Marco Rubio. We're going to go into it, but before we do that, let's warm it up with Andrew.
There's no place to hide now that he's arrived. I'm saying he ain't playing now with this campaign. Bang, dang, it's in. Drew, come roll with the gang gang. Drew, gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew, gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew, gang, that's who I hooked up. Yo, there's no place to hide now that he's arrived. I'm saying he ain't playing now with this campaign. Bang, dang, it's in. Drew, come roll with the gang gang.
Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds!
Josh, welcome to the show. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I hear you're running for Senate against Marco Rubio, so that's an interesting character. But before we get into that race, tell us a little bit about your background and, who you are.
Sure. My name is Josh Weil. I'm a high school math and science teacher in Central Florida. I've been a public school teacher for 10 years now. I am in my digital, I work from home now, virtual teaching. So I am in my classroom here built up. So I've got, a nice nerd friendly mixture of X-Men and Star Wars, Fantastic Four, human body, factor trees, whiteboards, some trig functions over here off screen. But yeah, I have been, I grew up at my LCS. I have been a lifelong comic reader, comic fan. I am one of the hosts and contributors on X's for Podcast, which is a Marvel themed podcast. We actually just finished recording next week's episode this morning. We're doing coverage of Marauders 24 by Jerry Dugan and Phil Noto. So we do weekly commentary. There's a team of anywhere from 12 to 18 of us that cover the weekly Marvel books. So every weekend, we break off into rooms of 3 to 5. So you get different dynamics if you listen each week, hearing about, the current X books and other Marvel titles, from a definitely inclusive, LGBT-friendly, nerd-friendly kind of hive. I love that. Again, like comics, and particularly the last couple of years, X-Men. My wife and I were offered jobs in 2018 going overseas. We taught for a year at a international school in Kuwait, which was a fantastic experience. It was not the perfect fit for our family. We came back after 1 year, but the traveling, the learning experiences, like if you want to understand what it means to be American, you have to leave America, right? Because everything that you know as default growing up in America, like some of it is global default, some of it is American default. And you will not know the difference until you leave and you see what stays and what changes the same. What changes the same, what changes and what stays the same. So it was a phenomenal experience getting to travel, visit a number of countries. We were stationed out of the Middle East, so we got to, I personally visited Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Palestine. We were out of Kuwait. We went as families to Lebanon a couple times, which I loved. In Beirut, we went to Istanbul. We got to go to Rome. When we came back, we spent a month in Mexico City for tax reasons. And just getting to experience the world outside, it really helps you understand what is possible, because there's so much we don't do in America. And I think we've just kind of come to accept that, like, if we could, it would have been done, and politicians tell us, it's not as easy as you think, or it's more complicated, or how do we pay for it? And then you go out and you travel and you visit countries that, spend 1/10 of what we do annually and have universal housing, or, your son gets his hand crushed in a door and it looks mangled and it's terrifying, and you have to rush him to an emergency clinic and they do x-rays and they send him to a radiologist, and and you have to go all the way around, and and then they give him a splint and antibiotics and anti-inflammatories and all of these things, and you go down to pay your bill, and your bill is 6 dinar, which is the equivalent of $20 US. And you're like, that would have been $8,000 in America. Why? Like,
Yeah.
like it does not cost $8,000 to fire up an X-ray machine, especially when you're paying the tech $11 an hour. Like it becomes more real of like, all right, even if we couldn't do it for $20, like, man, our system is like, we're so far off the mark. There are better ways, and it made my wife and I really become more politically active and driven. We became big Andrew Gillum fans from overseas. One of the things about coming back early was that we were super excited to be able to start volunteering and canvassing and going out for him prior to the primary. And then, when he had that big win, to be able to continue to be involved and support that campaign up until election day, that we were back here for it in 2018. And we've been pretty intensely emotionally invested and involved. The local level, we've contributed to candidates in a number of states at up and down ballot elections. Just really the importance and it solidified us as progressives, as enough is enough. States' rights are not an issue. States' rights are not an excuse to violate human rights or ignore human rights. We have everything we need to take care of people, and it's just a choice that we don't. And so the only thing that we need to do to change that is get 50 people in the US Senate willing to vote yes. Like, we have every other resource we need except that one. And that was a big part, especially after the 2020 elections, of saying, we're so close. We need one more push a little bit further, and we've got to get more progressives in. Do I think that the state of Florida will put forth a progressive candidate who will go out and engage the people the way Gillum did, who can build a grassroots and who can be successful and replace an obstructionist like Rubio with a progressive in the US Senate? No, because that's not our party. That's what we've seen growing up here, living here, being in local politics. And so I made the choice to be that, to make sure people know all across the state that option is out there. That in the primary, look, if it comes down to a big name corporate moderate, if it's Joe Manchin Volume 2 or Kirsten Sinema Volume 2 versus Marco Rubio, look, I'm all in supporting them. Kirsten Sinema is a hell of a lot more progressive than Marco Rubio, and we'd be good to have more of her and less of him. But we got to get more progressives. We got to get people who actually want to build and help people, and they're not going to make excuses about it. So the people want that. Progressive policies are popular. We've seen it here in Florida for years. We have due to our state constitution gives the party that's in control of the state legislature the right to write the districts, to draw the districts. Mm-hmm. And so the Republicans have been in power for 20 years, and they've progressively continued to redraw those districts more and more in their favor. So even though we have more Democrats as registered voters, we have a 65% ironclad lock on the state legislature. And we've gone around that every 2 years with progressive policies by putting them directly on the ballot as constitutional amendments. We bypass the state legislature, we send them directly to the people, and 65% or more of the population has voted yes on things like legalizing marijuana at varying levels, at increasing the state minimum wage, at restoring voter rights to returned citizens. Progressive policies are popular with Floridians, if not popular with Republican legislators in the state. So we know that we can appeal to them, and that's what we're doing.
Why do you think Florida went for Trump in 2020?
There's two big reasons. One is we do have more Democrats, but it is pretty close. And because our Democratic Party has just been the state Democratic Party has been flat out organized and outmaneuvered by the state Republican Party for the last 2 decades. There's no other way of explaining how every closely contested statewide election has been won by Republicans when we have the voter advantage. We have more Democrats, and we lose every closely contested statewide election. The only ones that we've won were the Bill Nelson Senate since 1994, were the Bill Nelson first 2 Senate races. And those were really because the Republicans conserved their resources and didn't invest heavily in those races. They were conserving resources for the races that they wanted to challenge. And the reason why they unseated Nelson in 2018 is because they made the decision to conserve those resources, and Rick Scott came in and put $30 million of his private money in that the state Republican Party wasn't going to support, and won and took out a popular and well-liked incumbent. So, it's the Spanish media is a big problem, which is to say that practically every single broadcaster who owns Spanish radio and television stations is owned by conservative organizations. And while there are still fairness in advertising laws, there's not fairness in coverage anymore, right? We see that with Fox News and everything else. We know that what you present as news can be politically biased. And so they're required to sell Democratic candidates the same number of rates at the same rates and prices as they do Republican candidates. So, your big statewide Democratic candidate getting their Spanish language ad on radio and television is getting those 30 or 60 seconds an hour for the same price. But the other 59 minutes are conservative, slanted, dominated. So we have to do well, and we've let that happen. Like, they've made that move, and Democrats have a lot of money too. We have not countered it. We have not done anything. We've conceded that. And it's one of the reasons why, a lot of people down here have this idea that Marco Rubio is unbeatable. Marco Rubio hasn't been challenged by a Democrat yet. Marco Rubio has run one closely contested race statewide, and he lost it. And that was the presidential primary to Donald Trump. He didn't win our state in 2016 when he ran for president to Donald Trump. He has not been closely contested. In 2010, the state Democratic Party actually tried talking this is on record. This is documented. This isn't like rumor. They called Bill Clinton down to help them convince Kendrick Meek to drop out of the race because they felt that the third party independent candidate had a better chance of beating Marco Rubio than their Democratic candidate did. So they tried talking their candidate out of dropping out of the race. They definitely did not provide any financial support or ground support for him. And in 2016, they promised the world to Patrick Murphy because Rubio was running for president. And as soon as Rubio changed and filed back in, they pulled all of that. Murphy didn't get a dime after Rubio refiled for the Senate race. And there was basically no campaigning. Like, if you lived here in Florida, that race wasn't even campaigned. Murphy had no money after that. Rubio didn't spend a dime. Rubio had like $25 million left over from his presidential run. He didn't spend a dime of it. He just coasted and won by 7.5 points off of all the media he had gotten from being a presidential candidate. There's been no contest for a senator that hasn't done a single thing, that hasn't represented the state of Florida at all. He's been all about national party line and himself. And people know that. Like, people in Florida know that. I go to red counties and they tell me Marco Rubio doesn't know how to find us on a map.
So how do you plan to mount a Senate campaign? It doesn't sound like you're a independently wealthy billionaire.
Well, I've got all of that public teacher money. I'm a public teacher, so I have all those years of of that fat public teacher, public school paychecks funding this. No, it's been very small and grassroots. We're on a budget. I have a full-time employee and 2 part-time employees right now. We're not running. I was just out canvassing for a mayoral candidate in Ocala yesterday. Which, by the way, if anyone's in Ocala, please, on Tuesday, September 21st, go out and vote for Dr. Manal Fakhoury. You have a real chance. Current polls show her neck and neck with the incumbent, and you have a real chance of getting a Trumpist Republican mayor out of there, and a real mayor who is concerned about public health and public safety for the people of Ocala. So please, this Tuesday is the mayor's election. If you're in Ocala, Dr. Manal Fakhoury. And yeah, she has more people on staff right now. She's also in the final week of a strong ground game. Like, we're not in the final week where we're 11 months and 4 days away from the primary. We're not as focused because we need to grow everywhere. So everywhere we go is a growth opportunity. But I have a field director, and we're building our field units. We have literature, we have materials, we have people going out in counties across the state. We have our electoral plan. We feel good about it. We know what the big mainstream Democratic moderates campaigns are. We know how they run them because they've run them the same way in all of these losing causes for the last 2 decades. And they're they openly tell you that they believe that campaign will be successful, even though it hasn't before, and they're going to continue doing it. They're going to continue only making in-person appearances in the 7 largest counties and spend the rest of the time on round-the-clock phone calls to big money and corporate donors, so that way they have enough money to blast television ads to the rest of the state. And it never works, but they're going to continue doing it. And, there's 67 counties in Florida. So if they want those 7, we'll take the other 60. And it's just, we've been everywhere across the state, from Pensacola to Miami at this point. The response everywhere we go is phenomenal. And, I truly believe that it's a numbers game, in the sense of every person we meet is someone who believes in this campaign. And we just have to meet enough people. So
what do you think is the key motivating factor for potential supporters for your campaign? Not just versus Rubio, but there's probably, I'm guessing, a lot of other Democrats that are trying to go for the nomination as well.
There's a lot of progressives in Florida. As I said, progressive policies are very popular, and they're going to be in a state that's had Republican governors for 23 years. Republican governors, not just Republican governors, but like Republican governors of the likes of Jeb Bush, Rick Scott, and Ron DeSantis, like progressively scarier Republican governors. And yeah, we haven't had a Democratic governor to appoint. The last time a Democrat appointed a judge to the state courts was 1998. So we have no power in of the 3 branches. And even though policies are popular, even though people are asking, hospitals are closing down during a pandemic because some of the counties aren't populous enough to keep them, profitable. And the people in those small counties, predominantly Republican because it's a smaller county, are asking for the government to help, to subsidize, to keep this hospital open. They need the hospital open. The government's like, that's communism. Like the state representatives refuse to answer their calls. They laugh at them. They hang up on them. Right? The state legislators don't want to do these things. They won't respond to the people. I've had great response even from Republicans. Everyone in the state of Florida, this is a beautiful state. Everyone cares about the environment. Environment is a top 3 issue for Republicans and Democrats. Unfortunately, it tends to get clouded out by, kind of more politicized issues like guns and abortion. But we're in a massive public health crisis right now. Florida is leading the country in COVID positivity, in COVID cases, in COVID deaths. We're the top ranked state right now in all of these categories. It has never been worse here. As a public school teacher and anyone who's a parent at this point, I do not know a single person in any county that is a parent and has not had to quarantine their kid at some point already. We're a month and a half into the school year. The county I work in has had more positives and more deaths through the first month of the school year than they did the entire school year last year. We've had to close down schools. We continue to have, we have a 1.5% infection rate among elementary age students in my county right now. And when you're talking about that Florida has some of the largest school districts and counties, like these numbers are not, 1.5% infection rate for a district of, our district has 85,000 kids, right? So 1% of 85,000 is is still 850.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's
Well,
that's 850 kids that are positive. And the people who are the opponents of it are like, well, it has a 99% survival rate. Fantastic. That's 9 funerals. That's 9 upcoming funerals of children because we're not handling this appropriately. Like I'm a math teacher. Math means something. Numbers are like 99%. I used to do this thing, so this is fun. As a math teacher to high school students, I always help them whenever we do statistics. I always do a little lesson that I call condom math. Right? Because high schoolers, teenagers, 16, 17-year-olds will like break their brain and they get it every time. So, we'll look up like the percentage on some condoms. Like this one's 99.9%. And they're like, that's great. And I'm like, this one's 96%. Would you use that? And they're like, yeah, like that's awesome too. Great. Let's do the math. 99.9% means 1 in 1,000 breaks. 12 condoms come in a box. That means 1 in every 80 boxes is going to have a defective condom. Are you okay with that? And they're like, yeah, that seems fair. Awesome. 96% means 4 in 100 break. That's 1 in 24. 12 condoms come in a box. That's 1 in every other box. If you have a box of condoms at home, you have a 50-50 chance that one of them is defective. How do you feel about those numbers? And they're like, that can't be real.
To all of us, Josh.
I'm like, that is what 96% means. 96% sounds really good, but it means 1 in every other box is defective. That's not a good number. And, sometimes, and it's real to them and they get that.
Yeah.
And it helps them look at statistics differently. And we need to do that with adults too. Like 99%. Awesome. We have 800, if we have 850 positives right now, that's 9 funerals. In our district, we had on the week of August 30th report, we had 500. We had 500 positives or 480 positives or something. And the number that ran when we were talking at the school board is like the conservative estimate is 4 to 5 funerals as a result of this. Like, and we've had student funerals. Like we have teachers at school board meetings crying because like they can't go to any more funerals, like schools that have had bad outbreaks, like kids are dying.
Yeah.
And we have a governor who is following the conservative mandate saying that, it's illegal for counties to go into lockdown and it's illegal for schools to make mask mandates. Right? He is making it illegal to keep people safe and the numbers keep getting worse. And at some point, like even if you buy in or you're a Republican, like there's too much of it. It eventually hits close to home. It eventually hits close to home where your kid got sick or your school had to be closed or your kid went to a funeral from his school or two teachers at your school died. Like these are all real things. These are all real stories of people who told me like they were against masks until this. And, DeSantis is unfortunately like, I would wish it was the other way. I would much rather that we win every big statewide election for Democrats in 2022 off of other issues. And we don't have this going on. But DeSantis killing people and killing children in Florida is right now putting whoever wins the Democratic primaries in the driver's seat across the board, because even Republicans don't want to see their kids die.
Yeah. And the other thing is hospitalization is not like a great outcome either. So just because, whatever large percentage of people don't die, if you get hospitalized and if you need a respirator or if you contract COVID and then you have a risk of long haul COVID, like that's not a walk in the park. I mean, that's a serious issue.
Yeah. And I mean, we have a lot of people having And we're not sure. There'll probably be a new term for it either down the line or if we ever get past COVID, but we're having people develop chronic conditions as a result of post-COVID, things that are similar to ME or Epstein-Barr or chronic fatigue syndromes where, people are recovered is not back to the way they were previously, right?
Yep.
They are not able to live or work or function at the full capacity as they were prior to COVID, just because they survived or beat COVID. And that's going to be a real thing that, again, even if we're saying that, 2% of people who survived it, when we've had 50,000 deaths, we've had, we've had hundreds of thousands, over a million cases or so. It's insane. The numbers
Florida's
are so
averaging 350 deaths per day right now.
Mm-hmm.
350 deaths per day.
We are at double what we were during the big peak prior to vaccine. Our map currently, when you look at the map, you see, and personally, you can look at our map and do I have a marker here?
I love having a teacher on the podcast. Classroom. Seriously. All right. I feel like there's going to be a quiz later.
Does this work? So when you look at our map, right, it started off, right, and we had our first big kind of peak, and then we closed all the schools and we had lockdowns everywhere. It got to 15, but we had lockdowns in the counties and it went down and we were practically at zero.
Mm-hmm.
Then you hit Memorial Day to 4th of July, summer of 2020. And DeSantis opened everything up for the sake of the economy. And we went straight up.
Mm-hmm.
We were at 4.5% positivity here.
Yeah.
We got up to, we were in the 10 to 15% positivity, our worst places here. And then we had our second peak, right? So we had our big peak in the summer. And then we had our second peak, which was a little bit higher, around Christmas break in December. These were big travel, people gathering periods, the summer and then the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
Then vaccines came out and we dropped down and we kind of got back to here again. Now, mind you, this is where we locked schools down the first time. Never again since then. We are now double that. We're double this. This was 175 deaths a day. We're now at 350 deaths a day.
Yeah.
This is where we're at now post-vaccine and what our map looks like. And quite frankly, I blame Ron DeSantis for every death in here.
Yeah.
Everything here, this was not avoidable. Once we brought it down to here, everything afterwards was completely avoidable. These are lives sacrificed for corporate donors and the sake of the economy. This was putting money over human lives. And all of those deaths are on the Republican legislators who have fought against public safety.
Josh, we need to continue this conversation. Let me just take a minute to thank some of the supporters of the channel. So I want to thank the members who keep this channel going. So first of all, we're going to start with our Senior Vice President, Soldier One. Thank you, Soldier One, our biggest supporter. And then next down, we have our VPs, Kristen Slevin, Laura Lane, Richard Johnson, and Bike. Thank you, guys. Then we have the hardcore level, Mike, Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Kirsch, Mr. History, Byron, Mona, Susan, Yang, Tony, Robert, Dean, Statner, Galessa, J. Perrin, AH, J. Brian, Vivian, Dana, Flavio, Yoda, Jason, and Parth. And then last, I'm just going to scroll by our verified nerds. So you can see all of them now here sorted by length as member. So thank you to all of the people who kind of help keep this channel going and support the operating costs. Let's get back to your discussion, Josh, about this COVID stuff in Florida. I actually engaged with someone on Twitter discussing this, And I think they might have been on the other side of the political spectrum, and they were saying, hey, don't criticize Florida. The only reason Florida cases are high is because it's very hot there and people go inside for air conditioning, and that very soon New York and all you coastal kind of blue states are going to have the same charts. And so it has nothing to do with DeSantis, but it's just progressives don't understand Florida climate. Have you heard
DeSantis is the only governor that hasn't taken the full money from the federal government to provide meals and safety for public schools. DeSantis has turned away and tried fighting against and closing down FEMA sites and government funded. He's discouraged people from getting the vaccine, all in an effort to open up monoclonal antibody treatment sites. Now, the fiscal side of this is that federal vaccine sites are free. The state does not pay for them at all. The people do not pay for them at all. They're provided by and funded 100% by the federal government. The monoclonal antibody sites is from a private company, and the state pays $1,000 a person. They're doing $3,000 a day at each site, which is $3 million a day per site that the state is paying to this company that is providing the non-FDA approved, non-peer researched monoclonal antibody treatment. And it just so happens that the lead investor and shareholder of the company providing the monoclonal antibody treatments is Ron DeSantis's largest historical campaign donor, having donated millions of dollars to DeSantis's personal PAC over the last 5 years. So, he is blatantly putting money over lives, and he's spending the state's money on radical and less effective treatments to please his campaign donors and creating dissension and misinformation to steer people there for the purpose of money at the cost of human lives. And he doesn't care. We have people arguing about masks. We have people, we had an army guy who worked in, dismantling chemical bombs saying that he would never wear a paper or cloth mask if there was a biological weapon. Like, they wore full hazmat suits with, rebreathers and this and that. And it's like, great. But you know what? Like, we don't have full hazmat suits and rebreathers for every student. That would be awesome too. But you know what? If you were going in there, like, he's like, I'd just go open face. Great. But you know what? Like, we don't send people, if you're cleaning out a condemned apartment, we don't send you in without a mask on. If you're painting or using turpentine, we don't send you, like, you wear a paper mask or something, because it's the difference between like dangerous levels and not dangerous levels. Like, no, it is not an airtight chemical rebreather. Okay. But also, those are about preventing an initial infection exposure, right? We are not preventing. We have a virus that is rapidly moving through the place, that is rapidly moving through our populace and is already here. And any measure is safer. And we don't need other data anymore, because we've been doing this for 18 months. We've been doing this. We made the announcements to first close our schools on March 13th of 2020. It's September 19th of 2021. It has been 18 months and 6 days. We have all the data we need. Okay? We know that in the first month of doing it this way, we have had more cases, we have had more positives, more school closures, more quarantines, and more deaths than we did in an entire year of requiring masks last year. Okay? So whatever your personal opinion or belief, or whatever outside data you want to look at or suppose about what the effectiveness of cloth masks, we have our own internal data in the state of Florida. And it says that last year we required masks, this year we didn't. Last year children were safer. End of story.
Yeah. It is interesting how a lot of the kind of hardcore MAGA folks are very open to monoclonal antibody, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, all these things that are really not proven to be effective, but then you have hundreds of millions of people who've been vaccinated with the Pfizer and Moderna stuff, and they've been fine. But there's such hesitancy around the vaccine and such love for the ivermectin and the monoclonal stuff. It's very strange. It's like, as if we're like, well, because this one is backed by Biden, I don't like it. And this
people were drinking bleach last year.
Yeah.
Like, that is literally Jim Jones Kool-Aid cult behavior. There's some people it has taken to a cult level, and that is dangerous, and we're seeing it. The arguments make no sense, right? You don't know what's in the vaccine. You don't know or you heard stories about someone. Well, you know what? There's going to be adverse reactions. Go back to the condom math, right? Mm-hmm. If 99.99% of people, that's 1 in 10,000, right, have an adverse reaction. Well, when you've given out 100 million of them, 1 in 10,000 means that 10,000 people are going to have had an adverse reaction. 10,000 times 10,000 is 100 million. So it's, like, the numbers are still, it's the safest thing we can do without locking down. If you don't want to wear a mask or get a vaccine, then you should be asking your government to lock down, to pay people to stay home for 2 months. Close everything, pay everyone to stay home for 2 months, and by Thanksgiving, we'll be in a much better place. And done. If you're not going to do that, if you insist on businesses being open and beaches being open and bars and restaurants being open, then you know what? You've got to protect yourself and cover or wear masks or get vaccinated or take as many of these measures as you want. These are the alternative. These aren't the safest thing. You're absolutely right. These are the best thing we have when we're not allowed, when the government refuses to keep people home. Because that's where you're safest.
It's interesting around the math of adverse reactions, because the inverse is also, I've also observed the inverse being applied, which is I've seen people say, well, I heard about someone who took zinc and he never got it, COVID. And it's like, well, that's good for him, but that doesn't mean that all of us, if we just took zinc, there would be no more pandemic. Like, that's not the math.
The other thing is everyone is different. There are people who are going to have natural resistances and antibodies, and you know what, like, their specific genetic mutations make it so that way the virus can't bond to their blood cells and they don't catch, like, even if they're exposed. There's going to be people who have natural physiological immunities, right? And then if you say, like, well, this person eats a Whopper every other Thursday
and he's still alive
and plays Fortnite and plays Fortnite every night. So if I eat a Whopper every other Thursday and play Fortnite every night, I can't catch it either. Like, correlation does not equal causation. We are all different. Every single person has at least 6 different wildly and potentially deleterious genetic mutations. Like, we just don't have them like, they're just unique to us. We all have very unique DNA. And sometimes those little things that never affected anything throughout our entire life, turns out they make it so you can't catch COVID, or you catch COVID worse, or you like as your environment changes, then they're going to make you more or less fit for that environment. That is the genetic explanation of evolution by natural selection. And yeah, like, we're seeing a little bit, we're seeing that play out in COVID as we've all had an environment, the first time in our lives that the environment around us has radically changed in terms of our fitness. But you can't try to apply correlations to that. stay
So
safe. Just
if your
stay home when you
cousin's
can, wear a mask, get the vaccine. Like, it's not as complicated. It's not that complicated.
So if your cousin's best friend didn't get vaccinated but ate a Whopper every other day, it doesn't necessarily mean eating a Whopper every other day will save you from COVID. So you heard it. You heard it here first. Now I have a question from the audience, Josh, which is, what do you think about boosters and sharing vaccine tech?
So boosters, I think, are interesting. I'd like to see some more of the, like, and this is one of those uncharted territory things of like, we don't have a tremendous amount of data. I'm all for it, especially people who had no reactions and have gone through their full cycle of the first vaccine. I mean, one of the things that we were hearing when the vaccine was first put out is that it was going to be good for 30 to 90 days. Now that we've gone further, they're saying they're comfortable with the numbers up to 6 to 9 months. The reason why they couldn't be comfortable with the numbers of up to 6 to 9 months was we didn't wait 6 to 9 months the first time as we were, going large enough on this. The vaccines have been in development since the SARS epidemic, back in the early mid 2000s. But we haven't had to have wide scale testing or people to test them on until now with COVID. And they've turned out to be more successful than we could have imagined. And we were very fortunate that the technology was close enough to get us there when it did. But again, in terms of then what you do with large populations, continued boosters, while the other variables are changing, like the effectiveness of the vaccine as we're looking at it was under conditions of masking and social distancing and this. And then as we ease up on that, we're changing all the other variables in the study. So then to say that like the vaccine has become more or less effective or boosters are more or less necessary, those are only consistent if you keep the other variables in place. If you continue to maintain social distancing and curbside pickup and masks indoors and like all the things that we were doing while we felt vaccines were effective and our numbers were going down from January through May of this year. So we've changed a lot of the variables too. I do support and say, look, if you had a positive experience with the vaccine and it has been 6 months, if your doctor advised it, like follow your medical physician. If your doctor says, yes, you are a good candidate and you can or should get it, then get it. Because you should not, it is extremely unlikely that you will have any adverse effects if you had none on the first shot or two, and you can only have positive. Like it is all reward, no risk for you if you had a positive experience on your first go round. So please, in terms of sharing tech with our allies, absolutely. And this just goes into human rights issues. I believe the progressive movement is about human rights. I personally believe that anything that is a human right should be secured for and insured by the federal government for all people, that we shouldn't have states' rights issues, that we shouldn't let, if we say that every child has a right to a free and appropriate public education, that we shouldn't then let each state decide the best way to do it and rank them knowing that some states will be best and some states will be worse, that we shouldn't have less appropriate public education in some places than others, or some states that decide not to teach things that we strongly want them, like, or to teach things that are inaccurate or misleading information and for science or health. And we're seeing some of the byproduct of that in the states that have, COVID deniers and science deniers and vaccine deniers now. If it's a human right, it should be for everyone. This is the United States of America. And in the year 2021, we have millions of people that don't have access to clean water in their house. Millions with an M. Like, that's ridiculous. And, we sat by through three presidents while Flint had unclean water. And the federal government did not just step in and fix that, even though it had every resource necessary to do so. It didn't during the Obama administration. It sure as poop didn't during the Trump administration. And it's working on doing it now during the Biden administration, which, look, that's improvement. But like, people in Flint still get a water bill that they have to pay that has an asterisk on it that says, note, your water may not be clean or safe for human consumption. We can fix all of these things, and we should. So if it comes to human rights, I mean, that's where our foreign interests should lie. Our foreign interests should not be about spending money or sending military aid out to help governments oppress or murder people, to destabilize, to be involved in political elections, to say that governments are more or less favorable, whether policies or trade policies are more or less favorable to us. It should simply be about human aid and human rights and nothing else. And if sharing our vaccine technology can save lives anywhere in the world, then that's what we should be doing. Like, we give away hundreds of billions of dollars in weapons to other countries every year. We sure as hell can give away vaccines.
A question from Vaughn, who's also a member of the channel. What's the impact of the Cuban American experience? I did notice there were some counties that went really hardcore for Trump in the 2020 election. And it's interesting that many of those were heavily populated by Cuban Americans. What's going on there?
So, and that goes back. So we were saying earlier, right, that there's a couple reasons why Trump won Florida as big as he did. The competitive advantage in marketing to Spanish-speaking Floridians is one of them. The other one was just that we were in a pandemic, and Democrats adjusted the way that they were canvassing and going out and interacting with people in order to be safe during a global pandemic, and Republicans didn't. So they got their message out to more people as a result of it. And I mean, that's a loss that maybe we have to swallow, because I wouldn't have done it differently. Going back to Cuban Americans, again, that policy has been very slanted. It's been wild for the last 2 months in terms of the Cuban conversation. And there definitely is a majority of Cuban Americans who, there is a Make Cuba Great Again movement, if that helps sum it up, who they want to see a United States military intervention on Cuba. They want to see us take out the government and put in a democracy there. And it is problematic, because as an American, if you have ever seen what a military intervention on foreign soil looks like, I can't imagine wishing that on anyone. Nevertheless, your homeland and family and friends. There might not be a more terrifying thing than a United States military intervention. There is a substantial population, although less vocal, who want to see us end the embargo and recognize Cuban sovereignty and open up trade and open up relations with them. Because from just an economic standpoint, we know that embargoes only hurt the people. Embargoes never hurt the leaders of the government, right? When you limit the amount of resources, the people at the top get them, the people at the bottom don't. And that's not going to change the attitudes or behaviors. It doesn't hurt the people at the top. And we have 60 years of evidence that that's the case in Cuba right now. To give you a hint, this all went sideways when John F. Kennedy was president, and he's been dead for a long time. So we have a lot of evidence that our current policy is not working there. Communism is not we should not be telling people that other ways of government are a threat to our way of life. First off, that's just petty and insecure. And second, it's objectively not true. The fact that Cuba chooses to provide free healthcare for their citizens does not make American citizens less safe. The fact that America does not provide free healthcare or government-funded healthcare for their citizens does make American citizens less safe. And that's a different argument. But look, they're a sovereign nation, and we should be respecting their sovereignty. They should have the right to, be run or led as the way they see fit, and we should not be making problems worse for anyone on any way, shape, or form. And there's a number of young Cubans who agree with that. One of the problems with us is that they don't vote in the Democratic primary, because oftentimes the family influence and the cultural influence of Cuban Americans is so strong that they will not speak out against they're very emotionally invested parents who feel otherwise, or grandparents or aunts or uncles. They will not speak out against them, and oftentimes they won't even register for the opposition party. They'll vote for Democrats in general elections, but they can't vote in primaries because we have a closed primary system. But there's a tremendous amount of support for that. In terms of what the Democratic Party is doing about it, well, the president of the Democratic Party right now is Manny Diaz, who would gladly be part of the Make Cuba Great Again movement, which is problematic for the Democratic Party. We have a party that, when put out to the people, polls have shown that active Democrats in the state of Florida support, the majority of Democrats in the state of Florida, voters, support ending the embargo on Cuba. And yet our state party's explicit platform policy is to maintain the embargo and to try to take out the Castro regime in Cuba, which is the policy of one person, Manny Diaz, not the Democratic people. He has explicitly ignored the data showing that this is what voters support, and decided to move forward with his own policy anyway. And that's problematic. And it's one of the reasons why outside candidates like myself feel like you have a shot against the mainstream candidate, because they are not listening to the people, and they are blatantly going against them under the belief that having more money and a bigger microphone will, get you that you get to tell them what they're voting on, not the other way around. And we do have votes, so the people will decide.
Josh, I want to ask you about two final things before we wrap up. Any thoughts on universal basic income and third party? Those are both topics that many of our viewers are following Andrew Yang's activities, and those are topics that are near and dear to some of the people who are watching this.
I would love to see a third party. I think the problem right now is that a third party doesn't work with as tight as the Republican Party is right now. The Republican Party has built tremendous brand loyalty in a way that any third party essentially makes Republicans and then every non-Trumpist split two ways against those Republicans. And the reason why I have said I would never run as a third party candidate in this race is that you're basically ensuring victory for the GOP candidate at this point. We would have to have at least a 4 or 5 party system with multiple conservative options. I mean, there is a fracture in the Republican Party. There are Republicans who are not Trumpists and do not like the way their party's going. But unless we can get them to create a separate conservative party, I don't think any idea to make a more progressive liberal or left party is only going to ensure victory for the GOP right now based on the system we're working in. We would have to have substantial change to the way that our primaries, that our election system is set up, and the way that it's a 2-party system. So unfortunately, that conservative machine is so strong that we can't be splitting. It takes everything that is not them in order to defeat them at this point. It has to be a united front against Trumpists in order to prevent Trumpists from gaining power or keeping power. As far as universal basic income, I absolutely support it. I mean, I've said that we need to be paying people to stay home now in order to finally end this COVID crisis. And I think that it's a way everything that we do that has a financial impact impacts minorities and working class people, hourly laborers, more than it does the upper middle class and wealthy people. Tolls, for example, Florida is the #1 state in terms of toll impact or burden in the country. In Central Florida, we have 6 highways. One of them is known for having some of the worst traffic in the state. The other 5 are all toll roads, which is why the one has such, I used to pay $8 to $10 a day commuting to my school before I switched to virtual on a teacher's salary. My wife and I were paying a couple $100s a month in toll impact. those limit mobility and access to employment and opportunities for minorities and for lower income people. Universal basic income is something that is absolutely necessary because even two family, when you don't have affordable housing, people cannot afford to live on two incomes in their household, nevertheless one. And so parents of small children cannot afford to stay home with them. And oftentimes daycare costs as much or more as they're making at their hourly job. You cannot get by without support at this point. We need to be able to provide a foundation that people can operate within. And that means money. At this point, that means giving people money. Until we have better government provided options for healthcare, for childcare, for housing, for water and energy, for all the things, for job securement, until we do a better job of providing all of these things to people, we need to be able to make sure that they have the money to navigate and provide those things for themselves.
Josh, it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. How can people learn more about you, or if they're interested, volunteer or support your campaign?
Absolutely. Well, you can find us on social media. So on Facebook and Twitter, we're at Weil for US Senate, WEIL, the number 4 US Senate. We are on TikTok and Instagram at Josh Weil for Senate, JoshWeilFor Senate. But mainly you can get all of this by going to our website, which is joshweil.org. So right here, JoshWeil.org. And when you go to that website, you can find links to donate and support us at our Act Blue page. You can find links to sign up to volunteer. You don't even have to be in the state to support us or volunteer. Text banking and phone banking options are available. We have supporters. We have campaign people across the country. My call time manager right now is a Floridian who's going to school in Baltimore. And so, we do call time like this. We're on our phones and we're reaching out. We're on a shoestring budget. But it does take money to win, and every bit helps. So you get just as excited when we see a $5 donor as we see a $100 donor. And I would much rather raise $1 million from 200,000 people giving me $5 than from one big corporate donor dropping $1 million in. This is a real grassroots campaign from the people. So go on to joshweil.org. You can learn more about me. You can learn more about our platform, and you can find all the links that you need for how to support us and how to get another progressive into the US Senate to help actually build systems that will help the American people across this great country.
I just also added the UBI tag to your ofthepeople.us profile. So for those watching, if you want to vote to approve Josh, and I'll move him up on the list for the trending OTP candidates as well. Just another way to help him get a little more exposure, help more people discover him. And Josh, best of luck to you on your campaign. I hope to have you back in the future. I very much appreciated the whiteboard moment. That was definitely a highlight of the interview. And I think a lot of people in the chat were saying, oh, this is fantastic. So it'll be great to get a little bit more math and logic into government.
Yeah, I did. My inner Katie Porter just kind of burst out there for a moment, but that's the teacher. Like I have whiteboards and dry erase markers around for a reason. So
yeah, and the chart was remarkably accurate. I had Googled it as you were doing that. I was like, yeah, that pretty much matches the peaks. So good for you for keeping it real. And with that, we'll say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.
I love it.